Welcome to the SimSkies podcast, the podcast all about Flight Simulator. And now, introducing our host, who can fly a fake airplane with a little bit of confidence, Lexterio.
Hello and welcome to SimSkies, one of the very few podcasts all about flight simulation. And so the episodes of SimSkies have been kind of sporadic as they've happened. It's been about a month actually since the last episode. And the reasoning behind that is because I don't want to just put out a podcast episode just for the sake of a podcast episode. I feel there should be something relevant to discuss. And going forward, what I've decided I think is going to be the best tactic to take with this podcast is simply like a news review, maybe every 2 weeks, maybe every week, kind of depending on what happens within the news of flight simulation. Of course, we had, most recently, unless you're living under a rock when it comes to flight simming, the launch of Microsoft Flight Sim 2024. And that is what this episode, of course, is going to be all about. Now, the launch happened on Tuesday the 19th. I, as many other people in the world, whether you're a content creator, which I don't consider myself to be, I do this as a hobby, it's for fun, but a lot of people took the day off, or the week off, or several days off from work or school or whatever it be to enjoy what Microsoft and Asobo have hatched together for Flight Sim 2024. The launch was, I think, what a lot of people should have expected. It was plagued by server issues. It is a lot more cloud-based than 2020, and 2020 had its own launch issues as well. Now, Tuesday launched at 10 a.m. Central Time here in the U.S., and I was lucky enough to get into the sim probably about 10:20 or so a.m. So about 20 minutes later, after Steam recognized there was an update for the game, went ahead and downloaded the game, which was only about a 30 gigabyte download, and then was able to jump into the server queue. Now, the initial issue was the authorization. So it had to authorize you as a user to verify you had a legitimate account for Flight Sim 2024. That was being hammered very hard, and was causing a lot of issues. So there was about an hour initially for most people before they could actually get into the sim after they had downloaded it. Once you got into the sim, the next issue was not all the planes were showing up in the sim. So I suppose it all depended on what time you got in and what part of the queue you got into. Certain planes would show up. Some people only had one or two planes actually show. Others had, a handful, maybe 10 or so. I think when I launched, I did a live stream pretty much every single day, weekday after launch. And I think I got in with about 6 or 7 planes. But the plane I really want to fly, which is the Cessna Skycourier 408, was not there. And I've been waiting to fly that plane ever since it was announced it was going to be included with 2024. And even though it's a Coronado plane, I still have a good time flying their planes. Even though they're basic, they visually are really, really good. They sound pretty decent. The flight dynamics and modeling are good enough to enjoy it. And so Sim came up, went ahead, and I did a couple flights in, I think, the 172, and I can't remember the other plane I flew, but I did fly another plane. And then I was like, okay, well, let's see if I could restart the sim and get the other planes, including the 408. And so I gambled, and of course got put back into a queue, and the queue was about an hour and a half or so, I think, somewhere around that time frame. And it was my fault. That was completely my fault. I should have stayed in the sim and just flew the career mode stuff and had a good time. So I got delayed again. So I think I exited the sim sometime after 11:30 or noon, somewhere around there. And eventually, again, got back in about 1 o'clock. I was about to give up, end the stream, and just go enjoy 2020 for a while. But I got back in and I got to fly. I stayed in the sim from around 1 p.m. until I think it was about 9 p.m. at night. I stayed in the sim the first day. Didn't exit after that point, but within there, brought up the next set of problems, which is downgrading of the satellite imagery. So the entire world is now satellite imagery done via the cloud. So, of course, all the satellite stuff, which was in 2020, but to a different extent. In 2020, there's basic ground textures, and then the trees and cars and all that jazz. In 2020, everything. So if there is no connection or the connection is really limited, what you see is a bunch of blue, green, or brown colors. No trees, no texture, no detail. It is bland. And maybe if you're lucky, you might see a gray strip for your runway and taxiways. That is the extent if the connection gets limited. And that happened to most people on Tuesday and then going into Wednesday. Now, going into Wednesday morning, the servers were still being hammered a bit, so the queue, they found a way to make it so that you can get into the sim, you just be in a queue for a little bit. I thankfully never really was in a queue too long. It's the initial 1 to 17%, sometimes 19%. That could take a little bit of time, and that's the authorization part and the loading of some stuff. Once you get into there, then you're in. So Wednesday, I was able to get in and out of the sim a couple different times and really enjoy the simulation experience of Flight Sim 2024. And then going into Thursday, Friday, and the weekend. Now, the weekend is where I was concerned the most. I was concerned because there'd be a lot more people hammering the servers, getting involved within Flight Sim 2024, and I'm happy to report, and if you're listening to this, you probably experienced it as well, there were very little issues throughout the weekend with 2024. They actually sent out a patch, I think Friday evening, that fixed a couple issues throughout the sim itself. But honestly, the main issue occurred on Tuesday, launch day, which is, if you look at any game in history, a lot of the times it's launch day, and sometimes it even is launch week, where there are a lot of server issues. In this case, it was launch day, and I do know there were some regions that continue to have issues with it as the week progressed a little bit. From my understanding, the UK, Europe had some issues. Maybe there just isn't enough servers there, or weren't enough servers there, and they slowly had brought some up so they can get that stabilized. But overall, the launch was what I expected. I honestly wasn't expecting to be able to do much on Tuesday. I really wasn't. And thankfully, I was able to get into it and experience it and have a very good time with the opportunities I had with the planes that were available. And so now we talk about Flight Sim 2024, the launch struggles. What about the sim itself? Well, I'm happy to report I'm having a blast in the sim. I think my Steam shows about 80 hours into it. I'd say about 5 to 6 of those hours overall over the past week of flight simming with it was maybe loading. And that's the initial load, that's the second initial load, and then just the loading every single day I jump in, which is about, I'd say, 3 to 4 minutes or so. Depending on the time you're entering the sim. And I haven't had any issues ever since Tuesday. I have not had an issue with not getting into the sim. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer than the other times, but it's a minute or two. That's about it. So the experience I've had from the very get-go was the ground physics. The improvement from the transition of ground to flying is so much smoother, so much better. Planes in the air seem to be a lot easier and better to control. Now, from my understanding, actual real-world pilots, whether they're general aviation or airline pilots, they have said that the dynamics are a lot more closer to realistic than 2020. The other thing that stands out personally to me was obviously the trees. The ground texture is just absolutely stunning, visually stunning. To have to land anywhere in the world and not have it completely paper smooth. Now there's rocks, there's concrete, there's just physics on the ground that are you just can't land there. You may come in for a nice landing with your Cub, realize as you get closer in, there are some rocks down there. You actually can't land in that area. So you got to make it, 180 or something. That is one of the coolest things of 2024 is that now the world feels more realistic and not everything is nice, smooth, and easy to land an aircraft. Now, there are some issues when it comes to the career mode. One of the biggest issues is the wind. The wind is just so aggressive after your first flight, for the most part. And these are missions that are supposed to be 1-star, and sometimes the wind's gusting up to 30 knots. And some people have reported even 50 knots in a Cessna 172. That is crazy. So there clearly is some issues with the wind. There's also issues with once you go into it further, the insurance for your own company is supposed to pay you out if there's a crash. Apparently doesn't. That doesn't always happen. So that one's not as big, but the wind one definitely is. There's an issue initially with the 36, the Bonanza 36, that there's no sound, but they got that patched with that first patch for the sim. There's some issues with losing points because you're taxiing too fast, even though you're really not, or you use flaps at the time you're supposed to use flaps, and it dings you that the flaps are down and you're going too fast. So there's some minor issues with the career mode, but honestly, it's the wind. The wind is the biggest factor, personally for me. But the idea is really, really cool. If you ever use NeoFly, it's essentially NeoFly with a little bit more. It's kind of like NeoFly mixed with APL. Combine those two together, and that's kind of what the career mode is with Flight Sim 2024. But you have to start from the bottom and work your way up. And it's really neat is because you can branch into any area you want to. If you want to go into agricultural, you can do that. If you want to go to helicopters, if you want to go into airline stuff, if you want to just do turboprop 2-engine kind of planes, you can do that. You got search and rescue, cargo missions, VIP, all kinds of really cool things you can do within the career mode itself. And the biggest challenge is, initially at least, is trying to get enough funds to purchase your first company and then make money going through that company. But it's a lot of fun, and I personally am putting on hold a bit until the wind gets taken care of, once the patch comes in for the wind, because I've gotten very lucky with a couple flights where I barely been able to get the plane on the ground because of how aggressive the wind is in the career mode. Outside that, the sim is just incredible. Think of it as 2024 with a lot of upgrades. It's not quite as polished as 2020 yet, but we've had 2020 for 4 years now. Of course, the first sim after that isn't going to be as polished. Remember, 2020 at launch wasn't that polished, and a lot of people stuck with X-Plane before they made the complete switch over to 2020. I think we're going to see the same thing with 2024. A lot of people are going to stay with the previous sim until 2024 gets its final nice touches around it. I am almost ready to uninstall 2020. The only thing holding me back right now is that the iFly 737 MAX is not available with 2024 yet. And I think once that plane comes available to 2024, I think that's when I can officially uninstall 2020. That's the only plane holding me back right now. Outside that, 2024 has been a pleasure to experience. It's been a lot of fun, and there was so much negativity initially in the front half of the sim. And I know everyone's experience is a little bit differently. On streams, I have people coming in there and saying that certain things aren't working for them, they have server issues and whatnot. So I know the experience is different across the board. It all depends on your connection, your PC, the hardware you have in terms of peripherals. So all that stuff matters, of course. But for me personally, the experience has been pretty dang amazing. And at this point, The sky is no longer the limit. The sky is no longer the limit. Well, that's a wrap for this episode. It has been an honor to be able to talk to you, to be able to share all my thoughts about 2024. I think it's an amazing sim. I'm so looking forward to the future of what 2024 has to offer. And we'll see what the next episode here on SimSkies is all about. Take care, and we'll see you next time.